Hello hunters and welcome back to another Monster Hunter World video. I've been playing a lot of Monster Hunter World recently as I have been preparing to hunt Fatalis. And as I play with all of the different weapons, it got me thinking, how exactly do I feel about some of these weapons and why do I like some more than others? Because you see, I'm the type of player that has always played pretty much every single weapon, with the exception of a couple of games in the past. But of course when I'm not doing too well, when I'm facing off against a difficult monster, or just when I want to have some comfortable fun, there are those weapons that I will always come back to. The weapons that best fit my playstyle and the ones that could be considered my favorites. And so in today's video I will be ranking my top 5 favorite weapons in Monster Hunter World. And let me tell you, this ranking was actually very hard for me to come up with, as again I have put a lot of time into pretty much every single weapon in the game, and it's kinda like picking your favorite child. But anyways, with that being said, hello everyone, my name is Dark Hero and let's get started. And starting off in the 5th place is none other than the Longsword, and yet this should set the mood for the entire list. I've always enjoyed the Longsword in the series since I played it in Freedom Unite, and with the massive changes that it received in Monster Hunter World, I actually ended up falling in love with it. I love that you are able to use Foresight Slash to avoid an attack while also being able to raise your spirit gauge level to then be able to deal more damage to the monster, and also have the Spirit Helmbreaker that, while not a very reliable damaging tool, it's still a very powerful and very fantastic move to pull off, that is if the move actually connects. And because the Longsword since its very inception has always been a weapon that allows you to very easily hit the monster and also be very maneuver at the same time, it always felt like an easy weapon to pick up and use, although with the addition of the Foresight Slash, the developers added a lot more mastery and skill ceiling to the weapon. And then of course there is the Iceborne expansion, where Longsword ended up getting the EI counter in the form of the EI Slash and the EI Spirit Slash. I know some people in the community find those counters to be problematic. Me personally, I like them to a certain extent, but at the same time they end up feeling somewhat excessive. Like at that point it really feels like the developers were honing in on the idea that Longsword was a counter or a parry specific weapon, which I'm not entirely against, and hey, let's be honest, the weapon feels good to play, and whenever you land a counter, it's always going to be very satisfying. Now, one big thing that I dislike about Longswords in Iceborne was the introduction of the Clutch Claw, specifically the fact that you had to tenderize the monster to deal more damage. And what the game classifies as the light weapons, which Longsword was a part of, required you to use the tenderizer move with the Clutch Claw not once but twice to get the actual effect off. And that personally always felt very clunky to me. I know that there's ways to get around that, and the developers did eventually add a decoration specifically to fix that problem, but I kinda don't like to depend on a level 3 decoration to fix that problem. So while the Longsword was actually one of my top 3 favorite weapons when the game first released, over time with the Iceborne expansion it actually ended up ranking down on my list. And so ultimately Longsword takes the number 5 spot on the list. I still love the weapon, I still have a ton of fun whenever I'm using it, it's just that now there are a couple of things about the weapon that I don't like as much. Now the next weapon, being the number 4 on the list, is going to be the Sword and Shield, which surprises me quite a lot, given how much I've played it in the past year. Now the Sword and Shield, being a very well-rounded weapon, is always something that I ended up using for quite a bit, but it was a weapon that I never ended up sticking with. It's cool that you're able to have this versatile playstyle where you have all of these different combo routes, and then of course you have the 2 qualities on top, being able to heal while your weapon is unsheathed, and having a shield to block incoming attacks, which is why it is one of the more beginner-friendly weapons. But as I have said in my weapon difficulty ranking video, the Sword and Shield should not be underestimated given how technical of a weapon it is. Now that being said, in the base game of Monster Hunter World, I'll be honest, I never found myself attracted to it, I never felt compelled to play it over other weapons. Don't get me wrong, it was cool to get the Falling Bash combo, having the backstab with iframes to be able to dodge attacks, and also having an infinite sword combo to apply elemental damage. Again, it was a very well-rounded weapon, but there was nothing standout about it. But then came the Iceborne expansion, which added a couple of very cool and impressive things, which were exactly what I was hoping to see for the Sword and Shield. I am of course referring to the Perfect Rush, which I always felt was such a cool move, where you take advantage of the iframes of the backstab and you go into this cool combo where you have to perfectly time your attacks, because if you miss your button input you're going to whiff and the damage output is going to be much lower. And the way that it's animated, the way that it sounds, it all feels very impactful, level very powerful, and honestly that's what drew me into the sword and shield the most in Iceborne. Then there was also the fact that the Gold Rathian sword and shield was by far the best sword and shield at the time that Iceborne released, and personally I've always been a fan of that design ever since I fought Gold Rathian for the first time, and so that was all the more reason for me to play with it. But then on top of that there was the Clutch Claw and the addition of the Claw Uppercut. Now I may not be remembering this too well, but if my memory serves right, when the Iceborne expansion first released, you were not able to tenderize a monster with a single hit of the Claw Uppercut into an attack. I believe that this was something that was patched in a later update, but given what I told you about the longsword, having a move that allows the light weapons, which typically need to do 2 Clutch Claw attacks to be able to tenderize a monster part, where now they are able to do it with a single attack, that just made the game much more enjoyable for me personally. And I should also mention that I'm also a huge fan of Frostcraft Sword and Shield. Personally, I just like the way that the weapon flows and the way that it looks, and when you have those animation particles on top, it just makes it feel even more powerful. And honestly, that's why I run Offensive Guard on my Sword and Shield, despite it not being a very good decoration for this weapon. I honestly just like the sound effect and the way that it looks whenever I proc the skill. And I do enjoy the more technical aspect of the weapon, and learning to take advantage of every small opening that the monster gives you to use the backstab to dodge an attack and go into a falling bash or into a perfect rush. It's just a very rewarding weapon that again I feel is very underrated by the entire community. Now the next weapon on the list is the one that was my main weapon for a very long time of Monster Hunter World, and that is none other than the Hunting Horn. It's a weapon that I frankly never really touched in the older titles, mostly because I was intimidated by the controls on the 3DS. But now in Monster Hunter World, not only did the game list all of the different melodies and how you were able to press them on screen at all times, but the weapon also felt actually simple to pick up and use. Now I didn't really start to play with the Hunting Horn right away as the game released. It actually took me a little bit, and I only picked it up when Behemoth released. It was an awesome fight, and to this day it's still one of my favorite monsters of the entire franchise, even though I get it, it comes from the Final Fantasy franchise, but I just love the fight so much, especially as a fan of Final Fantasy XIV as well, and with this quest giving each player a different role, I decided to maybe take out the Hunting Horn and try to play the support for our group. And that is actually how we were able to clear it for the first time, using the different melodies to apply different buffs for everyone. And as I learned to get better with the weapon, I also learned that you can be very aggressive with it, and it can be very rewarding as you keep on KOing the monster, almost as if you are a hammer player that can also support the rest of the party. I also have very fond memories of the Hunting Horn because the whole branding of this channel with the Wiggler head also came from me picking up the Hunting Horn and going up against Behemoth, because the Wiggler head was quite simply one of the best support pieces in the entire game when it first released, as I believe it gave you wide range level 3, so I was able to heal my party members and they were able to stay focused on just dealing damage. Of course, I then later on learned that maybe playing support Hunting Horn isn't really a great idea and the weapon isn't really suited for that, but then the Iceborne expansion released and the weapon felt even more powerful and even more fun to play with, as now not only do you have the best Clutch Claw animation as you go up on the monster and kick them with the horn in the face, but you've also got this really cool move where you spin the Hunting Horn around and it deals a lot of KO damage, and this thing, especially in the Iceborne demo, was dealing tons of damage. If I remember correctly, I think the Hunting Horn was actually one of the best weapons to speedrun the demo, which is absolutely nuts when you think about it. And I really do believe that the developers nailed the feel of the Hunting Horn in Iceborne, and I know a lot of people prefer the Hunting Horn in Monster Hunter Rise, but me personally, the weapon peaked in Iceborne. Now the reason why it's not higher on the list is because as we got more challenging and more aggressive monsters added to the game, the Hunting Horn being such a slow weapon kind of became more difficult to work with, and I felt like I could end up having much better results with all of the weapons that I'm going to be listing in this video by exerting a lot less effort. And also, if I'm playing by myself, I'm not really giving the buffs to anyone besides me and my Palico, and that kind of feels like a waste. Maybe this sounds overpowered, but I kinda wish that the developers would take into consideration and maybe increase the effect of the Hunting Horn buff depending on how many players there are in the lobby, so that if you are playing by yourself, maybe you get a more powerful attack up buff. Again, maybe that's too overpowered, but I feel like a part of the Hunting Horn's power budget goes into the supportive melodies, which of course are not really going to be as effective when you are by yourself. But still, it's one of my favorite weapons to this day. It's just one that I don't use as much as the other ones. Now my second favorite weapon is going to be the Charge Blade. Ever since I played with it in 4 Ultimate, I've always loved this weapon. The whole concept of charging up the weapon, empowering the shield, loading up the files, and getting ready to unleash that powerful SAED has always been a lot of fun for me. And let's be real, it was straight up broken in 4 Ultimate. Here in World it felt very much like a much more advanced and well-realized version of the Charge Blade from 4U. That being said, there was the issue of some inconsistent hitboxes with the SAD, but that's kind of part for the course with this weapon. It's one of those weapons that is really complicated to get into at first. You really need to go step by step until you get all of the mechanics, but once you understand guard points and you know how to block, and you know how to guard cancel, when to go for an empty discharge versus an SAD, using the high hitboxes of the axe to go for KOs and stuff like that, it becomes a very fun and engaging weapon that can go in all kinds of different ways. And then of course in Iceborne not only did they buff elemental damage, making elemental files Charge Blade actually viable in the game, but of course they also added the spinning axe mode, which was a very cool and novel addition to the Charge Blade and made for some very fun and rewarding gameplay styles that was very different compared to what we had before. So now the Charge Blade was a weapon that could essentially be played in 3 different ways. You could go for the raw SAD playstyle, the elemental playstyle, or finally go for the spinning axe playstyle. Now me personally, I never got very good at using the spinning axe in Iceborne. I would say that I got much better at it in Sunbreak, but then again, Charge Blade kind of felt very easy in Sunbreak, especially with those automatic counters that also load up your files, but that's for another day. Ultimately, my opinion on the Charge Blade is that it's just a very cool and fun weapon to play with that has always been one of my reliable weapons to take whenever I don't know which one to go with, and I also just like how it looks, how it transforms. It's just a very cool weapon that I can't get enough of. And now before I talk about my number 1 favorite weapon, I want to go over one honorable mention that almost got into this video, but didn't quite make it. But first I want to ask you guys a favor. I've started a brand new YouTube channel where I'm making new videos, and it would really mean a lot to me if you were able to go there and subscribe to the channel as I'm trying to hit 1000 subscribers. The link to it will be in the description. Thank you for all of the support and let's continue with the video. And that is the Insect Glaive. It's the weapon that I played the most by far when Monster Hunter World first released. I was even attempting some speedruns at the time, and it's the way that I got my foot in the door with the Monster Hunter community by uploading my 1-hour guide to the weapon. The Insect Glaive was always a weapon that I wanted to get into since 4 Ultimate, but given the 3DS's controls, it's just something that I never got used to. That and the very complicated consect system that was in place in that game. But then in World, the Insect Glaive is just a very simple and easy to pick up and use weapon that is easy to understand, easy to manage. The ground combos are not only flashy but they are also very powerful, and the aerial attacks, while they might be lacking in some firepower, they were still a lot of fun and were very satisfying to execute, and also allowed you to essentially just have an easy time against most monsters in the game. Unfortunately, I kind of stopped playing the weapon because of how simple it was, but also because of Iceborne. You know how I talked about the light weapons having the problem with tenderizing monsters? Well, it was kind of that exact problem with the Insect Glaive, and I also never really enjoyed that whole system that they added with the Iceborne expansion, where you can use your slinger ammo to empower your Kinsect. I don't know, I never really enjoyed those additions, they never felt particularly fun for me, so I ended up liking the Insect Glaive in Sunbreak a lot more, for example. Still, it's a very fun weapon that I still like to take out from time to time and play with, but over time it was ultimately taken out of my top 5. And now my final weapon, my current favorite in Monster Hunter World, it's none other than the dual blades. And I'm actually pretty surprised to be saying this. I never really played with the dual blades a whole lot when the game first released. I never really felt like I was doing a lot of damage with them, and they also never felt particularly attractive or appealing to me personally. Yeah, the Levi spin move where you go down a ledge and you end up spinning on the monster is really cool and satisfying to pull off, but I don't know, the weapon just didn't really stick with me when the game first released. But with the Iceborne expansion, the weapon felt a lot cleaner for me to use. I'm not really sure why. I guess it's in part because the monsters are a lot more aggressive, they deal a lot more damage, and so you are much more at risk, and so having a weapon that is particularly adept at being able to deal damage to the monsters but also being able to dodge out of the way of attacks, well, it comes in especially handy against more difficult monsters. And there was an entire rebalancing of the game in Iceborne where elemental damage was buffed across the board, and so naturally dual blades became a lot more powerful. I suppose I also never really liked the aspect of having to craft multiple different dual blades for each different element, but since Monster Hunter World is now a very old game, I've had the time to craft all of those different dual blades and all of those different sets, and so I don't have to worry about grinding for those. I can just pick the set that I want and that the monster is weak against, and I'm honestly going to have a great time against it. And looping back to the Sword and Shield, I believe that somewhere around the middle updates of Iceborne, the developers decided to add a way for the dual blades to tenderize the monster with a single hit by performing their attack where you do a couple of spinning slashes into the clutch claw, and then you come spinning around on top of the monster while tenderizing a part. Not only is that attack awesome to use, it deals a good amount of damage, looks awesome and gets the job done. Then there's also the Slinger Burst that you can use to dodge out of the way of incoming attacks that has a lot more iframes and covers a lot more distance than a regular dodge, so it goes back to just being a very mobile weapon that allows you to be very aggressive, and if you are able to manage your stamina properly, then you're going to be rewarded with a weapon that can deal a lot of damage, but also has some very good defensive tools. And as I am preparing to hunt Fatalis and as I try different weapons, my weapon of choice becomes clearer the more that I use the dual blades. But with that being said, were you expecting any of these weapons to make it to the top 5? I know a lot of you were probably expecting the longsword to be in the top 3, maybe even be the number 1, and what exactly are your favorite weapons to use in Monster Hunter World? With that being said, my name is Dark Hero, thank you all so much for watching, and as always, happy hunting!